Resilience is more than bouncing back. One of the most common definitions of resilience is the ability to bounce back. But I think resilience is much more sophisticated than that, because sometimes you shouldn't bounce back to who you were. You've learned too much. You've experienced too much. You've grown too much. The goal isn't always to return to your previous state. Sometimes resilience means moving forward differently. I describe resilience as our capacity to recover, adapt, recalibrate, and continue forward with intention. Notice I didn't say ignore what happened. I didn't say suppress your emotions. And I definitely didn't say just push through. Because pushing through everything is not necessarily resilience. Sometimes that's just survival. Resilience requires awareness. What happened? How did it affect me? What do I need? What can I learn? What needs to change? And how do I move forward from here? That's a very different process from pretending we're fine. The stress response can challenge growth. There is always a neurological component to this conversation. When we experience significant stress, uncertainty, conflict, rejection, or a perceived threat, our nervous system becomes concerned with something much more immediate than personal growth. It becomes concerned with protection. And when we are operating from a heightened stress response, we can become more reactive, more defensive, more rigid in our thinking, and we may avoid things. We may become overly controlling. We may interpret feedback differently. We may struggle to see possibilities because our internal system is focused on protecting us from what feels threatening. Think about it. If you've ever received an email that upset you, you probably weren't immediately thinking, what a wonderful growth opportunity. You probably had another reaction first. That's human. The goal isn't to eliminate that reaction. The goal is to become aware enough that the reaction doesn't automatically become the response. That's where resilience creates space. Space between what happened and what we decide to do next. And inside that space is where growth becomes possible. From survival to growth. When we're operating primarily from survival, our thinking can become centered around four things: protect, avoid, control, and then prove. I need to protect myself. I need to avoid this. I need to control the outcome. I need to prove that I'm right, capable, worthy, or good enough. But growth requires something different. Growth requires us to learn, adapt, explore, and evolve. So how do we move from one to the other? Through three important practices: awareness, regulation, and reframing. Awareness helps me recognize what's happening. Regulation helps me manage what's happening internally. Reframing helps me consider another perspective. And none of those things means pretending the problem doesn't exist. They simply help us respond to the problem from a more intentional place. Recognize the story you tell yourself. One of the most powerful questions we ask ourselves after a setback is, what am I making this mean about me? Because events happen, but then we attach meaning to those events. I didn't get the opportunity. Maybe I'm not good enough. My idea didn't work. Maybe I'm not capable. Someone criticized me. Maybe I'm a failure. I made a mistake. Maybe everybody knows I don't belong. Do you see what happens? We move from describing an event to defining ourselves. Resilience interrupts that process. Instead of automatically saying, I failed, resilience allows me to say, that strategy failed. And there's a difference. Failure can become information. Rejection can become redirection. Feedback can become data. And discomfort can become development. This isn't toxic positivity. We're not pretending disappointments doesn't hurt. We're asking, what else can be true about this experience? That question opens the door to growth. The resilience reset. I want to give you something practical you can use when you're experiencing one of these moments. I call this simply a resilience reset. There are 3 steps. Regulate. Ask yourself, what is happening inside of me right now? Before fixing the problem, notice your response. Are you anxious, angry, embarrassed, or overwhelmed, defensive? Give yourself enough space to recognize what's happening. 2, reframe. What else could this mean? Maybe this setback isn't evidence that you can't do it. Maybe you need another strategy. Maybe the feedback isn't an attack. Maybe there's information inside it that can help you improve. Maybe the delay isn't denial. Maybe you just need more preparation. 3, respond. Finally ask, what is the next intentional action? Not the next 10 actions, the next one. This is something I want you to remember. Clarity over panic. We don't have to solve everything while we're emotionally activated. We're going to regulate, reframe, then respond. That's resilience in practice. Build psychological flexibility. Another important component of resilience is psychological flexibility. Resilient people aren't people who never struggle. They aren't people who never get disappointed. They're not people who magically remain positive regardless of what happens. They develop flexibility. They can experience discomfort without allowing the discomfort to completely define the next decision. They can adjust their strategy without abandoning their goal. They can acknowledge this didn't work without immediately deciding I don't work. That distinction matters. Growth mindset isn't about believing you can accomplish absolutely anything. It's about remaining open to learning, development, adjustment, and possibility. And resilience gives us the emotional endurance to remain in that process. Your growth. Let's make this personal. I want you to think about one challenge you're currently experiencing. It could be professional, personal, something you're building, something you're trying to change, something that hasn't happened as quickly as you hoped, you don't have to share it. Just identify it. Now, ask yourself 4 questions. What is this challenge teaching me? What response is no longer serving me? What would a resilient response look like? And finally, what is one action I can take next? Sometimes resilience isn't a dramatic comeback. Sometimes resilience is one intentional decision, one conversation, one boundary, one new strategy, one more attempt, one decision not to allow a difficult chapter to become the conclusion. If there is one idea I want you to remember from our time together, is this: growth mindset gives us permission to believe change is possible. Resilience gives us the internal capacity to stay engaged long enough to experience that change. That's why, for me, the two belong together. We cannot talk about sustainable growth without talking about what happens when people encounter stress, setbacks, disappointment, uncertainty, and change. Resilience doesn't remove those experiences. It changes our relationship with them. Instead of every setback becoming evidence that we should stop, it becomes information that helps us evolve. I want to close by asking you to complete one sentence. When growth becomes uncomfortable, I will. What will you do? Again, complete this sentence. When growth becomes uncomfortable, I will. Here's some examples. Maybe your answer is, when growth becomes uncomfortable, I will pause before reacting. I will ask a better question. I will regulate before responding. I will stop making every setback personal. I will try another strategy. Give myself permission to learn. Whatever your answer is, make it intentional. Because resilience isn't built by only during major crises. It is strengthened in everyday moments when we choose how we're going to respond to difficulty. Growth will challenge you. Growth will stretch you. And sometimes growth will require you to become someone you haven't been before. But when resilience becomes part of your internal operating system, you don't have to fear every difficult moment. You learn how to recover. You learn how to recalibrate. You learn how to respond. And ultimately, you learn how to evolve. And that is why resilience is the foundation of a growth mindset.
Invest in them. We are Female Founders Initiative Global. We don't compete, we collaborate. We don't just network, we open doors for each other. We are Female Founders Initiative Global. We don't compete, we collaborate. We are Female Founders Initiative Global.